Thank you for joining our seminar, short seminar on the new research from our research associate, Jessica Forden, who was our star master's degree student and will be coming back to the PhD program. She's already doing PhD level work. Jessica got her BA degree at Wellesley College, her master's degree from the New School. And she is now funded by the Social Security Administration. Will be announced in a while for her path-breaking work that you'll see today. Jessica, I'd like to hand that over to you now.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Teresa, for that lovely introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to get us started. Okay, can everybody see the slides?
We can, thank you.
Okay. All right, so as Teresa mentioned, I'm going to be sharing 5 quick slides today highlighting some top-line findings from our research at the Schwartz Center on older adults, their care needs, and how they are met. In our research, we are concerned that a large portion of older adults who have difficulties with daily and instrumental activities aren't getting the help they need, and that this unmet need may contribute to worse health outcomes over time. Most importantly, however, we see gaps in care occurring across the wealth spectrum, but we should be particularly concerned about adults without close family and those in the middle class. To start with, in 2020, almost 20 million older adults, or 19% of the population 55 and older, had difficulty with one or more activities of daily living, ADLs, or instrumental activities of daily living, IADLs. But over 40% received no help with those tasks at all. These are adults who have trouble with walking across a room, eating, getting dressed in the morning, for example, or who need help grocery shopping, preparing meals, or taking medication. That 8.3 million adults with difficulties are not receiving help is really concerning for the long-term health of these individuals. ADLs are routine self-care tasks that need to be dealt with on a daily basis, and IADLs are crucial activities that allow an individual to continue living independently. And research shows that these unmet difficulties can lead to accidents and negative health outcomes, such as greater emergency department visits. So I'll pause for a minute so folks can kind of take in the slide here, and then I want to make a couple of points about the data that I'm sharing. So first of all, our data is coming from the 2020 Health and Retirement Study, which is a longitudinal survey of adults age 50 and older in the US. We are specifically focused on adults ages 55 and older because we are interested in individuals who are facing disabilities and difficulties due to conditions related to aging. We use 55 and older instead of a higher cutoff like 65 plus, as some other analyses do, because the higher age cutoff ignores an important group of adults who also have difficulties but are not likely to qualify for Medicare or assistance through Medicaid. This means, first, that the scope of the problem is worse than if we took a more narrow lens, because there are these additional adults who need support, who we should be thinking about. But also, these are people whose families are likely the ones providing that support for the group because they don't have access to public programs yet. And additionally, the care needs of this population, the 55 to 64-year-olds, if it goes unmet, has potential for an increased level of care needed down the line when they enter into that 65 plus group. Secondly, we consider the population that needs help with one or more ADLs or IADLs as needing help or care, because these tasks are crucial personal care tasks that need to happen on a daily basis, or tasks that allow a person to live independently. Difficulty with even one can be a hindrance to daily life. Now, I want to be clear that that doesn't mean that someone with only one ADL or IADL difficulty is going to need institutional care, like at a nursing home, or a high intensity of care necessarily, but it does mean that they need some help with a task that is routinely performed. And we wanted to make sure that we were capturing these gaps in addition to folks who might need a more intense level of long-term care as well. So on this next slide, you can see that having a spouse or children really increases your odds of being cared for pretty significantly. You see 60% of adults with a spouse or children get some form of care, compared to only 42% of those without a spouse or children. Now, This is because elder care in the US is just so heavily dependent on the often unpaid labor of family caregivers. In fact, family care is the most common source of elder care. And in our report, you'll see we also find that in 2020, over half of adults who needed care got it from an adult child or grandchild, and 44% received care from a spouse. That's compared to only 23% of adults receiving care from a paid professional, for example, an in-home care aide or employees in a nursing home. These data points, by the way, are not on the slide here, but are in our full piece, which we'll make sure to link at the end of this presentation, and we'll be sending out in a follow-up email to this event. That care is so dependent on family results in it not necessarily being very wealth dependent. So we see care gaps existing across the wealth spectrum. Instead, it is much more dependent on some individual circumstances, like whether you have a spouse or adult children nearby and whether they are in a financial circumstance to help. This reliance on spouses and adult children is also additionally concerning, not only because of the pressure and costs it places on unpaid caregivers, but also because the population without close family is only going to increase with trends like higher divorce rates and declining fertility and marriage rates. In summary, we should be concerned as these adults without spouses or adult children are often going to have to rely instead on professional care, which is prohibitively expensive for most households. And when we look at professional care specifically, a wealth pattern is very apparent. You get what you can kind of see from this graph here, a U shape for who gets care, professional care specifically, across the wealth distribution. So those at the bottom and those at the top of the distribution are most likely to get professional care, and those in the middle class, are least likely, hence the U shape. This is because folks in the top quartile are most able to privately afford care, while those in the bottom quartile are most likely to qualify for public programs that will subsidize the cost of or outright pay for care. In fact, you'll see in our piece, we also find that about 45% of adults in the bottom wealth quartile who receive professional care pay for that care in part through Medicaid, Medicare, or other insurance, compared to just 15% of those in the top 25%, meaning the top quartile are likely paying out of pocket. Access to programs like Community Medicaid, however, can vary significantly across states, given that the rules for demonstrating need and waiting lists are all kind of different depending on what state you're residing in. Overall, though, these programs are really designed to primarily support those in most need, so those at the very bottom. And what this means is that policies like Medicaid, Community Medicaid, miss those in the middle class who likely still can't afford the increasingly expensive professional care options on the private market and will otherwise have to depend on family care if they have folks who can provide that care. That means middle-class families are largely going to feel the squeeze of that missing safety net for their aging relatives. They'll be the ones to subsidize their parents' care needs, either through their own finances or time or a combination. And so what this research really highlights is a pressing need for policies to better address the care needs of aging Americans, and specifically to expand access to options like Community Medicaid, especially in states with long waiting lists and older populations. Expanding access to these programs can also help to reduce the burden of care that is currently placed on family, which itself has many consequent negative impacts that have been numerously documented, including financial strain from reduced work, as well as longer-term impacts to the caregiver's own financial security later in their retirement age. Details for all of that are in today's piece, but also in some of our previous work as well. Both of which I will share links to now. So that concludes my presentation for today. And again, I want to thank everyone so much for attending. And now we'll open it up for questions. So I'll also note that I'm happy to answer additional questions or take any calls after the event as well.
Just want to highlight some findings here. You've been reading the New York Times as they report on the Kaiser Family Foundation research. Please note that we look at a broader group, the people who are above the age of 55, not just 65. And we've expanded our definition for what needing help means with one ADL and IDL, not the more restrictive category that they did. And by expanding our scope, we found 11 million more people and assess their needs. This research of Jess's were focused mainly on the people needing care and not getting care, the care gap. Previous work looks at the people who are giving the care, with special attention to their race, gender, and class, and highlighted some implications for their own retirement planning. We are looking at a picture where the unmet needs of the elderly are creating a lot of strain on their adult children, mostly, and creating another whole generation of people at risk as they grow old, not only because their health is affected by having to care for an elderly relative without support, but also their finances are very much affected when they have to care for an elderly adult. So we are looking at it at those who need care and those who are giving care. So that's just by way of highlighting some of the great work that Jess has been doing for a year and a half. And now open it to anybody who wants to show themselves, by turning on their video, raising hands. Actually, Jess, can you stop sharing your screen?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Any questions, comments? Any panicky feelings? we wanted to evoke all of those things.
Hi, everybody. Teresa, thanks for including me. I'm Jen Rosano. I'm working at the Milken Institute Center for the Future of Aging. I just wanted to respond to your comment, Teresa, about the impact on the next generation, which is deeply personal as a Gen Xer in the situation, the fortunate situation of being able to care for my parents. But the question I have is around whether there is any data source for understanding how individuals in I'm just generalizing by using Gen is doing, because the focus is so much on baby boomers and their future that I do wonder if we're going to just be a little too late in getting to this question that you've just raised, and what kind of data sources are there for looking at how the next generation of elderly are doing.
Jess, can I have you hold that? I know you know the answer. Hold that question while we take Margaret Price's question. Okay. Margaret, you're on mute, and it wouldn't be a Zoom call if someone wasn't. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. I just wondered could you address the issue of the cost of care, if we're talking about people 55 and plus, when they get to 65, is it going to be much more expensive? How do you finance the cost of care? Is Medicare the only answer, or do you have a better suggestion?
Medicaid is a big part of it.
And what else can we do? I mean,
yeah, exactly. Marge, and one more, Jess, can you okay, great. Marjorie Lohman, please unmute yourself.
Hi, my question is what is going to happen with the slew of nursing homes that are closing across the country? Many in fear of the patient-nurse ratio law coming up because there just aren't people to fill that. I think this is going to cause another tsunami of people who will be almost homeless.
Wow. Jess, I think that's a lot.
Okay, I'm going to try my best to answer all of your questions. So first on the question around, a clarifying question actually, around your question, Jennifer, was about data on how people who are taking on this burden of care are doing, and also sort of like the next generation of aging, not just the baby boomers. Is that correct? Yeah, so that's a really great question. I will say in terms of impacts to sort of the next generation, or looking sort of by age groups, right now, the data set that I've used in my work has been mostly the American Time Use Survey. It provides a lot of really great data on unpaid caregiving, elder caregiving. They have a specific module on elder care that they introduced in 2011 and have asked as part of their survey since then. And that survey is a subpopulation or a subsample of the current population survey. So you can also pair that with some of the CPS related variables if you're interested. And so one of the things that I've looked at in particular is how unpaid elder caregiving based on different, frequencies of caregiving. So are you providing care once a month, or are you providing daily care, different intensities of caregiving, how that affects the labor force participation of people who are providing unpaid care, particularly of people who were previously in the CPS sample working full-time already, who were full-time employed. And you do see that there are impacts to the labor force participation, particularly of women who are providing daily elder care. So that's sort of one finding that is out there that hopefully we'll be putting out soon. I'm submitting that piece to a journal as soon as hopefully by the end of this week, so we can get those findings out there. But I would say, yeah, the data on elder caregiving is limited. Unfortunately, the HRS really only starts at age 50 and older, which kind of doesn't hit, I guess, the generation of sort of like next coming. But hopefully, as they collect more data going on in the years, they add more people into the sample who are aging into that group, and we can start looking at them. But I would say really right now, off the top of my head, the American Time Use Survey is sort of best for looking at particularly unpaid elder caregiving. And that has people sort of all over the age spectrum. So typically I start looking at age 25, just because usually those are folks who are working full time, not in school and stuff. But that has people all over the age spectrum, and you can specify it based on who are they providing care to? Is it a parent or is it a family member? There's a lot of really great data there that should be looked into more further, which I'm also hoping to do as part of the additional research in this sort of body of work we're doing with the center. The next question around costs of care. So definitely costs of care are extremely high, and they are only getting more expensive, unfortunately. And in terms of financing, I think that's actually the problem that we're facing right now, is we don't really have a ton of great solutions. Right now, it is mostly Medicaid, from my understanding. I think some people sort of talk about long-term care insurance, but we have research by Tony Webb, who's somebody who's worked at the center and who we're affiliated with, that kind of shows that people who need the long-term care insurance end up having their policies lapse before they get to the point where they can actually get the help that they need from those insurers, because of sort of like, as you decline, you're not necessarily on top of all of your like finances. You're not on top necessarily. You might forget to renew your policy, etc. So unfortunately, yeah, the cost of care is really the big issue here. And I think that that's only a problem that's going to get worse. In terms of financing, it's really right now, it's sort of like you have to, I think the New York Times piece with Kaiser Family Foundation actually did a really great job of highlighting this, but basically your only option is basically to destitute yourself until you can access a program like Community Medicaid, because you have to destitute yourself to a point where you meet sort of like the asset and income cutoffs that those programs use for eligibility. And then to the next question on what's going to happen with the slew of nursing home closings, that's a really great question to ask. And I don't know. I haven't really looked at nursing institutions specifically, but I think, just based on what you're saying, that definitely nursing home closings are going to just exacerbate the problem. I don't know if Teresa or other folks have anything to add on to sort of what I've shared already about in response to either that question or the other two questions that I just answered, but that's certainly not going to help, because we already know that that the supply of folks of labor for long-term care is already very strained, that we just don't have enough people who are interested in working those jobs, in part because those jobs are not necessarily good jobs. They don't pay well. They're often very strenuous, both emotionally and physically. And so if nursing home closings are only going to sort of exacerbate that issue is my guess. Should we, I don't know if anybody has any...
Sorry, Tori, I just saw your hand.
Can you all hear me okay?
You can.
Great. Thank you. My name is Tori. I am a PhD candidate in sociology at Ohio State University, and I am an intern at the Center for Economic and Policy Research, and I'm very sad that I had to join this webinar a little bit late. So please accept my apology if this is something that was already covered, but I'm interested to know if this project has considered looking at geographic variation in unmet care needs by state. I actually just tried to Google very quickly, is the HRS representative at the state level? Because I couldn't remember. So if somebody knows the answer to that, I would also love to know the answer to that, and would be very interested to hear if anyone here is working on a project that looks at unmet care needs for aging adults at the state variation level. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Jennifer Rosano and I were just chatting about that individually. The best you can do in the HRS, and Tristan Phillips, who's on our team, knows the data set well, but we found that we had to just group states together in kind of regional areas. And that, that is a pretty good approximation, except if you're trying to look at variation in state policy, which you really can't do in the HRS. But you certainly can look at regions of the country where these gaps, might have a particular pattern, and then also urban-rural would be another distinction. But I think that in the aging research, everyone, it's the variation by parts of the country. Variations because of industrial base, because of policies are really necessary. This country is too big for us to accept a median and means on these variables. We really do need to look at regional economies and clusters of policy norms. Does anybody else want to add anything? Tristan, anything usually you follow me by correcting me. Is there anything? Yeah.
No, I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, but can you group states to get kind of a regional sense?
Yes. So yeah, in the public data, you can group the states. Also in the restricted data, which they have a geographic file that's restricted. You can get the state level, but it's not representative of all states. So some states, I think like Hawaii, have very small sample size, but some of the states do have decent sample sizes. I know, like, I've seen research out of New York, Florida, California, North Carolina, Illinois. Some of the larger just population stamps, they do have a decent sample size inside that state.
Usually, just rules of thumb in our research is that you need population centers of 8 million, to get anything that is statistically representative. To break it out into subgroups and such. Yeah, we want to know what policies work, and sometimes
I think Wendy has a question.
So
Sorry,
I just have a observation. I work for State Senator Kruger, and we just got a call, and this is not the data question, but it is a small solution. We talked to a former policy person at PHI who is trying to refine legislation and is law in Washington State, where there's a payroll tax to pay for long-term care. It is certainly not a solution for people living in New York City, because I think it maxed out at $60,000 over a lifetime. But there are new models being developed that where people are thinking about ways to finance long-term care that actually individuals, middle-class individuals have control over. That's all I wanted to.
Wendy, no, I mean, the Washington state model was so hopeful for all of us. It took a very strong union to get a a statewide campaign to do it. And we watched it disappoint. And that's because it's not mandated. And whenever you have insurance where people can pick and choose whether or not they're in the pool, then the pool gets very expensive. You have adverse selection and maybe even some moral hazard. And so it became a lot more expensive, and then it got more restrictive. And remember, we were so close to long-term care insurance when Obamacare was being debated. The AARP pushed hard to add long-term care to Medicare because it's a group. This is something we all face. All families face this. It's a uninsurable risk in terms of a private sector plan, and it needs to be socialized and pooled. But we lost it. And so the kinds of things we're looking at are expand Medicare to include some of these, because private long-term care insurance is not an option for almost all people. And the other one is to lower the Medicare age. And so that people with these health problems that we could see creeping up in the 50s, it doesn't get worse, by the time they hit 65 and get decent health care. So yes, we are slouching toward a solution where it has to become a national pooled solution. Margaret Price.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Thank you. So you provided some extremely interesting information about the difference between people who have families and people who have children in terms of who they could turn to for help with elder care, or if they are elders. But what if you are single? Who is the best to turn to? What are your options for getting help?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I think that that's some of what we try to highlight in our piece, which is that really your options are sort of like, if you have community members or other family that maybe you can that you have, but again, it depends on if they're close, if they're nearby you, and if they have the financial and time ability to provide that care. And then it's to look at the what are the options on the private market, basically. What are the are you eligible for Medicaid assistance? And if not, sort of like, you have to look at the expensive professional care options to get your help, or to maybe, I would assume that some people are making a decision just to not get that care if they can sort of struggle through in different ways. It depends on sort of what your what ADLs and IADLs you have difficulty with. For example, if your difficulty is walking across a room, maybe it's trying to find sort of assistive technology instead, like a cane or a walker. If you have difficulty with grocery shopping, it's maybe trying to navigate technology to get groceries delivered. But ultimately, I think that's the point of our work, which is that if you don't have that family, you're kind of really out of luck in your options, because the system is so heavily dependent on family care. It means that these are people that are getting left out of the care system unless they have the means to privately afford that care, or they they meet the eligibility requirements to get assistance from Medicaid.
Is there anything they can turn to? Is there an organization that they could turn to if they were single? Let's say you're elderly and you don't have children or a spouse. Are you aware of organizations that someone could turn to?
So oh, Teresa, you're muted.
Yeah, so part of the national organization for aging communities and the Older Americans Act is trying to get social services, and then what they've done is created Department of Agings in almost all the big cities, and also will have a Department of Aging. So it's through those Department of Agings or your social work networks.
Thank you.
We are almost at time. We have time for another question. We don't have a lot of solutions, but we are raising the emergency alarm.
I think we have one more question from Michael.
Okay. Michael.
Hi, Teresa. Thank you
Hi.
for inviting me and just for your research. Just a comment. I found the chart that you had that was shaped like a U. I found it to be very interesting. I'm not sure what to make of it or what I expected, but I found you would think that it would be more of a slant, but it's very interesting.
Yes.
That turned out that way, where the folks in the middle are really suffering. And the folks at the bottom end are have a little bit better shot at getting resources. Just a comment. Just interesting to see that.
No, Michael, from your perspective, you represent teachers. They're not the poorest. They work their life. Their pay is slipping. What is really a concern here is that you have people who worked all their lives. They play by the rules. They even join a union. And yet all of their wealth can disappear, and the surviving spouse, having spent down, could be rapidly downwardly mobile. These have humanitarian consequences and political consequences. So that's very, I'm really glad you noticed that part of the research, and I'm not surprised you did. So thank you all very much. Please look for emails for further what we call little research snacks.